Earlier this year, Windows on the World covered the Paris Climate Challenge, which was effectively an alternative event to the COP21 talks in Paris. This September the 8th and 9th saw a follow-up event in the UK, which was titled New Dawn of Truth. These conferences are organised by a group of scientists who question the CO2 climate change consensus coming from bodies such as the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We have covered how this political consensus is a huge fraud being perpetuated on the world's population. You can see our previous shows in the archive at windowsontheworld.net. Also check out the article Big Society Change Agents for how draconian policies are being implemented against the public interests, but in the wider interest of huge corporates and wealthy individuals who are merely profiteering from this global action plan, which is implemented locally by your local council, and it's causing huge poverty and taxation, plus restriction of our rights through UN control, through an organisation called ICLEI that you probably won't have heard of, ICLEI, which is Local Government for Sustainable Development. Viewers of Windows on the World will be familiar with some of the speakers at the conference. Several weeks ago we did a show with one of the organisers of the conference, Niels Axel Morner, a leading expert on sea levels. The show is titled Sea Level Expert versus Climate Lies Destroying Coastal Communities. The show exposes the scientific fraud on sea levels, which are projected to rise up to 1 metre in the next 100 years. This is being used to collapse property prices and depopulate coastal areas in Britain. Check out also Climate Change, a New Religion, which is on the site and YouTube. This new religion of climate change is being taught in schools and corrupting new generations into a false belief that they are saving the planet by giving away all their freedoms and being taxed and enslaved. This innovative group of scientists and researchers originally booked a 2-day conference at UCL in London. The booking was cancelled because these scientists have dared to question the now provably fraudulent data used by the IPCC. In an email to organiser Atham Al-Sabti, Professor Jonathan Butterworth, who's head of Physics and Astronomy Department at UCL, sent the following message. It has been brought to my attention that you have booked a room at UCL for an external conference in September for a rather fringe group discussing aspects of climate science. If this event were to go ahead at UCL, it would generate a great deal of strong feeling. Indeed, it already has, as members of the UCL community are expressing concern to me that we are giving a platform to speakers who deny anthropogenic climate change, while flying in the face of accepted scientific methods. I'm sure you will have no desire to bring UCL into disrepute or to cause dissension in the UCL community, and I would encourage you to think about moving the event to a different venue, not on UCL premises. Now, the same day, Professor Al-Sabti cancelled the booking, and he stated, I can assure you that this was a terrible moment for me. Everything I had worked on for 7 months seemed to be in ruins. The Thermageddon cult had struck again, to use the terminology of Christopher Monckton, one of the contributors. However, the conference did go ahead and was relocated to Conway Hall. However, Conway Hall did not advertise the event on their website. This is entirely unacceptable, as many of the group are experts in their field, and many used to contribute to the IPCC until the projections and data input became fraudulent. The group have set up geoethic.com, where papers and articles are published. The idea is to have a new integrity in science called geoethics. The lectures from the Dawn of Truth conference are streamed at deluxetech.co.uk. Climate Change Conference both days. This enterprising group have also set up clexit.net. See our article on Windows on the World, Climate Changes for Real Science. Here are some interviews with contributors who lectured at the conference. Firstly, Viscount Christopher Monckton on the problems with UCL, plus the media bias and political manipulation against real science. So, Lord Monckton, you came down to Conway Hall.
Yes.
This is the second conference we've had this year, and it was transferred from UCL. Can you tell us a bit about the background of what's happened and how we ended up in Conway Hall?
Certainly. Originally, the conference had been suggested, and we were all invited to participate, by Professor Athem Al-Sabti of University College London. He's an associate professor there. And we agreed with alacrity because he had managed to book a room at a very reasonable rate, which would have taken us just nicely. It had all the right audio-visual facilities, probably rather more efficient than the ones we had here. And so we were very enthusiastic, and he made the booking. And he was then contacted by Dr. Jonathan Shuttleworth, I think his name was, who was the head of the physics department at the university. And he was told, really, you ought to understand that this sort of conference is not the kind of thing that we really approve of here. This is a rather fringe group, and they have no business discussing the climate. They don't know anything about it, and we think that it would really be better if you moved it somewhere else. And the threat in this email, which I have read in full, was palpable. It was a very nasty email from a very nasty little man. And Professor Al-Sabti was mortified. He's not used to this kind of savage, bitchy, left-wing university politics. So he caved in before we could stop him and cancelled the booking. Because if we'd stood firm, they'd have had to just put up with it. And so I, at that point, wrote to the provost and said, do you realise that the head of your physics department has been interfering in academic freedom of speech, which is a very central tenet of universities? And so the University's Funding Council, at my instance, is now examining whether University College London should any longer receive any taxpayers' funding. And it is likely on present form that they will cut it off without a penny.
Martin Hovland documented pH and temperature anomalies in the deep ocean.
My talk was about the 73% of the Earth that is covered by the water. And I call it the dark side of the globe, because it's an invisible part of the globe, and there are so many important processes going on down there that some of them affect the climate. And in the ocean, which are up to 3.6 kilometer deep on average, there is heat coming through because the oceanic crust is thinner than the continental crust. The heat from the internal Earth is felt by the ocean crust. So you have these hydrothermal systems going, whereby the heat from the internal Earth is transmitting into the ocean. And they reckon about 25% of the heat loss of the Earth is through the ocean floor. And we think that IPCC and others have paid too little attention to the submarine volcanoes and the submarine hydrothermal systems that are working on our planet. We have, for example, 55,000 kilometers of ocean spreading. And if you think that every kilometers or so you have a hydrothermal system going, giving out about 1 megawatt of energy per day, then this is in fact a very important contribution of heat into the ocean that is not taken care of by the IPCC.
They talk a lot of ocean acidification.
Yes, and it also transmits into the ocean acidification question. Why is the Pacific Ocean more acid than the Atlantic Ocean? And the answer to that is natural, because the Pacific Ocean, as you know, is the ring of fire. That's where you have all the volcanoes. The Pacific Ocean actually covers half the globe, and it's on the seafloor, the hidden surface of the globe. There are thousands of volcanoes, and there are thousands of hydrothermal systems where you have acid water coming into the Pacific Ocean from below, and it's transmitting and making the Pacific Ocean more acid or less alkaline than the Atlantic Ocean.
And that's something that we don't hear. We just hear this generalized thing.
Yes.
That's being caused by the global warming, CO2.
What you hear from the IPCC is that there is nothing beneath the ocean floor. There is only from the atmosphere. There is only an impact from the atmosphere. There's nothing coming through the sea floor. And that's, of course, totally wrong. They haven't paid attention to what is coming through from the heat of the natural earth.
Do you find people in the scientific community receptive to your work in the respect that I'm talking more about people who are maybe going with the science and consensus and getting grant money?
Well, I work together with experts of my own field, but we find that we are talking to deaf ears because we cannot convey this impression. It's too difficult for us to convey what we are finding on the sea floor because it's an invisible environment. To go down and visit the sea floor costs a lot. It's just like planning a mission to the moon, to go down on the sea floor and look, because it's so expensive. And to convey that message that we see to the people on land is too difficult for us. I've been working with this for 38 years, and I find the same problem all the time. We are working in darkness. We are using torches to look at what we are and trying to explain that to others, the fantastic things. The problem is we first have to interpret our own pictures before we can explain what we have found. And in the meantime, the people have left the scene.
So you are literally working in the dark then?
We are really working on the dark side of the earth. That's what we are.
Peter Ward discussed whether ozone depletion and not greenhouse warming was causing recent climate change.
The IPCC was formed in 1988 in order to demonstrate consensus on climate change so that politicians would spend the money necessary. And they were successful. They've done a great job, and a lot of scientists have worked very hard. And this would be wonderful if the science was settled. But science is never settled. And what we're realizing now is that the whole science of greenhouse gases is beginning to crumble. And part of what I was trying to emphasize today is that the world has changed now. Because of the Paris conference, the scientists are on the high ground. But the problem they don't realize is the high ground is crumbling underneath them. I can say from my own work in understanding the physics of climate change that there was a fundamental mistake made about 150 years ago. And because of that, it's physically impossible for greenhouse gases to be the actual explanation for climate change. What I presented at the conference was showing that volcanic eruptions come in two different flavors. One is explosive, and that causes cooling. The other is effusive, lava flows out over the ground. That causes warming. And the balance between these two we see in the ice cores going on every 5,000 years or so. We get suddenly warm, and then we slow down, we cool slowly. We get suddenly warm again, we cool down slowly. Any mechanism to describe climate change has to explain the rapid warming and the slow cooling. volcanoes turn out to be one way to do it. Maybe there are other ways. Well, I formed an organization called Science is Never Settled. And we have a website, scienceisneversettled.com, because no scientist can disagree with that. But somehow in the effort to forge this consensus, some people are now saying the science of greenhouse gases is settled. It isn't. It turns out it's quite wrong. And the scientists don't want to recognize that. They've worked hard on this. There is good scientific reasons for their position, but it turns out there's a mistake. And so now the problem is how we can face up to that mistake. I've been trying to get the scientists to step forward and say, there's something not right here. We're going to look into this. But what I get back from the typical scientist is, Peter, there's no way you could be right and all the rest of us are wrong. And in science, we have to be open to new ideas. We have to be open to the fact that we get new information. And this is one of the things that's been lost now. And then one of the worst parts of this consensus is that many people are trying to get to penalize those who question the consensus. Well, consensus is the stuff of politics, but debate is the stuff of science. And it's very important that we open up the debate again, because it's not settled. And the longer the scientists refuse to step forward and consider the other possibilities, the worse science is going to do, the worse it's going to look for science.
Yeah. Consensus science, they've been very marginalised and they're working alone. You put across a great idea of how we get this across to the general public. Could you just go into that for us?
I think it's very important for us all to realize that every person working on climate change, no matter what their position is, what they're working on is the most important thing to them. They've worked on it a long time, they've worked hard. So what I've been trying to communicate to this group is we don't need personal attacks. We don't need to go after people individually. We just need to show what the problems are with the current theory. And I listed off several different ideas for people to think about that just don't make sense, that there are clear problems that anybody that even doesn't know much about science can see as a clear problem. For example, I pointed out that the climate models assume that you get hotter standing in the moonlight than you do standing in the sunlight. Well, this is ridiculous. We all know that when we stand in the sunlight, we get hot, we might get sunburn, we might sweat. Whereas the greenhouse gas theory says that the infrared energy coming up from the earth in the moonlight makes you hotter. And that's obviously wrong. So there are many conditions like that which just turns out cannot be explained adequately by greenhouse gases. But in talking to some of the top scientists in the world that are behind the consensus, they just won't consider that possibility. They just can't imagine that they could possibly be wrong. We've got to get this worked out soon. I mean, we're talking about spending $10 trillion to correct greenhouse gases when most scientists agree that's not enough if greenhouse theory is right. And I'm saying, no, greenhouse theory is wrong, and that's a total waste of money. Now, $10 trillion is equal to more than $1,000 for every man, woman, and child on Earth. That money needs to be spent on poverty and on many other fundamental issues we're facing. Well, what is clear is that as countries begin to understand how much money's involved, they're beginning to back away. I mean, Benny Peiser yesterday from the Global Warming Policy Foundation made it very clear that the political accord is beginning to break down as soon as local leaders begin to realize how much money's involved. And we're talking about a lot of money. I mean, energy drives our way of life. We have a good quality of life because we burn a lot of energy. The average American burns 32 times more energy than the average person from Bangladesh. Okay, and with that we can drive our own cars and we can have fancy clothing and the whole bit, and we depend on energy. If you start taxing energy one way or another, call it a tax or call it a surcharge or whatever you want to call it, that's going to cost all of us dearly. And we better be sure. If we need to do it, we ought to do it. But it's pretty clear now we haven't done it. You know, one of the most amazing things, it has never been shown experimentally that if you increase the amount of greenhouse gases in air, the air gets warmer. Now that's a travesty. How could we be ready to spend $10 trillion and never have shown? And that experiment is simple. That's a straightforward experiment. So one of the things I've done is I've issued a challenge. I'm offering $10,000 of my children's inheritance to the first scientist that can demonstrate that greenhouse gas theory actually works experimentally. I sent that challenge in personal email to over 2,000 climate scientists who contributed to the IPCC reports. And my response was, so we've got a problem here, Houston. We got to deal with a problem. And it's extremely important that we all face up to the problem. Ideally, the scientists would say, oh my gosh, we got to look at this. But I can't even get them to stop and think about it. In the future of the world, the fossil fuel that's going to last hundreds of years longer than anything else on Earth is coal. We know how to burn coal safely and healthy, provided we're not worried about CO2. We solved the acid rain problems in North America back in the 1970s and in Europe. So coal is one of our biggest resources. The biggest resources of coal in the world are in the United States. And so for energy independence, the United States, we depend on that future. So we're making changes now that are having big effects. I mean, many coal companies have gone bankrupt just in the last year or two, because now, I mean, to build a power plant, you have to look decades ahead. It takes a decade or two to decide to build the plant. It has to have a lifetime of 30 or 50 years. And already people that are making those kind of decisions are beginning to back away from coal. And yet coal is our future, and it is safe to burn coal. I'm a well-published scientist. I used to be an associate editor of a famous science journal. I have never had trouble being published until I worked on climate change. And now I have had more than a dozen papers rejected without review. It isn't that they disagreed with the science, they just wouldn't even send them out for review. That's not science. That's a real problem. Science is about debate. You put out your data, you put out your analysis, and many young scientists can climb the ladder of success by proving you're wrong. So you need this discourse. Science is all about debate, and unfortunately, the IPCC, not intentionally, but by their processes and by this effort to build consensus, has led to the death of science as we know it. And we've got to bring that back.
I talked to Viscount Christopher Monckton about the formation of a world government and the climate change agenda.
I mean, let's not leave anyone with the impression that I am just coming out with this allegation off the top of my pointy head. If you read the draft Copenhagen climate treaty, which I think you can still find on the UN's website, though they bitterly regret ever having put it there, it is absolutely clear that they wanted at Annex 1, paragraphs 36 and 38 of the draft treaty, which fortunately failed, to establish a global government. And it was quite clear that this government was going to be given overriding economic and political power. It was not going to be elected by anyone. It was going to be a fascist dictatorship. And I exposed that and spoke out against it. And I did so within a day of finding out about it, because a scientist sent it to me and said, you need to see this. And I was speaking to the Petroleum Club of Calgary at the time in October 2009, and there was a journalist there from the Morning Telegraph, which is a big national paper, the Morning Post in Canada. And he came up and sneered, and he said, oh, Monckton, I thought better of you than you start talking about global government. I said, I have 3 words for you. And he said, what? I said, read the bloody treaty. I said, that's 4 words. And he said, yes, it is, but I said, you deserve the 4th word. So he went away, and he said, but is there such a treaty? I said, do you really think that 25 of the richest men in the world would invite me to give them a detailed briefing on climate change if they thought I was some kind of pointy and just make stuff up? So, just look at the context, man. Don't be so stupid. Of course there's a treaty. He said, well, you send it to me then. So I sent him a copy. And an hour later he got back in touch and he said, he rang, he said, why didn't you tell me? I said, but I did. He said, but it's 10 times worse than anything you said. And I said, well, yes, but if I'd said what it really said, you would never have even thought of even asking me whether there was such a treaty. You wouldn't have believed it, would you? He said, actually, no, I wouldn't. I said, now that you know it exists, what are you going to do about it? He said, I'm going to clear the front page of the paper and this is going to be all over it. He spent a week checking it out, and then all over the Morning Post in Canada, was its front page story about how they were trying to set up a global government. And it turned onto 2 huge pages inside with all the details of what was in the treaty. And a week after that, he was working for the then Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, to make absolutely sure that Canada played no part whatsoever in any such treaty.
Okay, so welcome to Windows on the World. Now, you gave a very excellent presentation today. Could you introduce yourself and the key aspects of what you came here to talk about?
Okay, my name is Leonello Serva, and I was the former director of the Italian Geological Survey. Now I am doing consultancy all around the world. Climate was always one of my preferred items. Yes, sorry for my English, because I have always looked to the complexity of the climate, because in the climate there are many factors that are ruling significantly, and most of them are natural factors like the astronomical or natural, and so I think I was always against the IPCC forecasting, because they are oversimplifying the problem, giving a lot of importance to things that are not relevant at all in the world system. So until they prove that CO2 is a real problem, and this is not proved yet, because there are many other factors that are much more important than CO2, and they never speak about this. So this is something that is unethical in my judgment. Because when you are dealing with a complex system, you have to show to everybody, to the public, what are the rules of the different phenomena, what is the weight of the different phenomena, and then the people can have a real idea. But if you start only with one phenomena, then you are not giving the proper the proper significance of the science, and this is something that is very bad for the human being, I think. We are a group now in this committee that we are fighting but we are like a small guy fighting with a huge guy, so it's difficult to win, because he's too strong. He has the media, he has the government, he has the politician. But I think our witness will be good in the future, because I'm sure that they will fail, because this forecasting is not real. So tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but it will fail, because there are other phenomena controlling the climate, and this will come out. Of course, today we are the loser, but I am sure that tomorrow we will be the winner. And for the science, it's very important that someone can witness that not all the science was going behind this kind of how do you say, this kind of consensus, because it's not a real consensus, because a real consensus is when you show exactly what is the phenomena, and then you try to find the solution. Indeed, they have already at the beginning they found the criminal in the CO2, and then they are going around. But since this is not true, because the other phenomena are ruling significantly, they will be the loser. And what is very, very bad for me is that we are putting a lot of money on these problems, while we have, for example, natural disaster that the cost is very high, and we are not putting any money on this, because we are wasting money for things that are not important. I'm writing a lot of articles in Italy saying that, look, in Italy we have to take care of the earthquakes and volcanic and floods, and then we are wasting money on this certificate, green certificate, and the school of Italy are in a bad situation, that an earthquake can make a collapse of a school, and we were lucky in the Amatrice earthquake that the school was empty, but if it was full, we could have killed many young persons. This is very bad.
Yeah, so they're worried about the emissions of buildings when
they
the
don't
forces of
care
nature
about
are
the
slightly
walls.
stronger, yes.
If the walls are, this is a very good point.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's the one we make continuously, really.
Yeah.
That they're mixing up kind of natural disasters with these predictions, with models.
Yes.
And that's what you were saying, that the modelling is falling apart.
Yes.
We did a show recently where they were predicting a 1 metre sea level rise, which is depopulating parts of the British coast, called managed decline or managed retreat.
How can human? Yes.
And this is falling apart. So, could you just tell us what websites we can go to for you? Have you got a website?
We have a website that is named Astrolabio, in Italy, where I write something. It belongs to the Friends of Earth, the Italian Friends of Earth.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, but we were pushed away from the International Friend of Earth because we were against their
they're
policy.
very much a part of it.
Yeah.
They've been brought into it. That's
Yeah.
very interesting. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
That was great. Thanks a lot. It was really good. Really good. Thank you. Can you just introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Per Strandberg, and I has a degree in applied physics, in master's degree. But I'm an independent researcher. I look a little bit. Now I presented information about ENSO, or El Niño, La Niña cycles.
Yes. So, can you just tell us a bit about your presentation? Can you give us the key points that you made today?
I demonstrated. I use an artificial neural network, which is a pattern recognition methodology, and I established that ENSO, El Niño, La Niña variation is driven primarily by strong tidal pulses and variation in sun's electromagnetic activity. And I should add, because I found these two drivers for ENSO, and they are not weak drivers, they are the dominant driver of ENSO. And the question is, why hasn't the climate community, all the people who build the ENSO models and put in money in this research, why haven't they found these factors? Primarily the lunar tidal pulses, which generate ENSO variability. Because the wind is blowing from east to west, is pushing warm water to the west of the Pacific, and it creates a warm pool. And then, because there's something called Kelvin waves, when the wind slackens and go the other ways, and then it push out a tongue of warm water under the surface, under the equator, and then it pop up eventually, sometimes, and then it fill up and start this El Niño cycle. And that's the main functionality. So there's some other phenomena called Julian-Madden oscillation, which is area of convections which moves around clockwise around the Earth. It takes 30 to 60 days. And this is phenomena I think is also governed by the same forces as. Why doesn't the media tell about the warm period in the Arctic that happens during the 30s and 40s? It takes just a few minutes to go and search this up in the
yes, because they changed
internet.
their data, their graph data, to start in the 70s.
Yeah, but you can find the raw temperature recordings.
Yes.
And you can see that it was as warm then as it is now. And then the climate cooled and the temperature drops, and from there they started again. And, yeah.
Yes. So the public needs to look a bit further than.
Yes. No simple question: where can they find empirical evidence from the planet that there's a high climate sensitivity against carbon dioxide. There's no scientific report that you can find that show that. No one. Yeah, I find it very strange, this IPCC, when they pick scientists who are very close associated with environmental group like Greenpeace and World Wildlife Fund. And then they go and they write a summary, these people. And then they present it in the workshop. Last time they did it in Stockholm. And there they have these scientists, and then they have diplomat and environmental bureaucrats from different countries, and then they go through sentence by sentence and change it so that it should be even more alarming.
Well, that's right, yeah.
And it's crazy, and few people know about it.
Well, a graph was recently presented as being factual, which was provably fraudulent, and they show you a graph, and the public think that is real science, and these models and projections.
And the last graph that they show, the last El Niño from 98 to 99, the temperature spike is vanished.
Yes.
It's fraud, really.
Yeah, my name is Jan Erik Solheim. I am an astrophysicist living in Norway. I was retired in 2002 from University of Tromsø. Then I moved to Oslo, and now I am retired, of course. But I became interested in the climate science 2007 when Al Gore got the Peace Prize and the IPCC got the prize. I started to read about climate change, the IPCC report, and I was shocked to see the difference between what I read in the report and what came in the media and the conclusion that was told to ordinary people. So I said I couldn't support that conclusion. So I started by myself and then found other people, and now we study how the sun interacts with the Earth and why the sun changes, because we have a planetary system, and so the idea is that the planet acts on the sun and the sun acts on the Earth. And my special topic today was about ice in the north, the Arctic, because I lived in Tromsø for 30 years and then connected to the people that study the high north. So that's my background.
Yes, so do you think that if you'd presented this to the scientific community before you were retired, in other words to the IPCC, that they would have accepted your science?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think they would have accepted the science, but there is hard data in here that I could not neglect to look at least. Like you say, it has no meaning, it doesn't count, but what I told today is based on observations, in fact going back 300-400 years to 1550, when the seal hunters and the whale hunters went north. They found whales north of Spitsbergen, and there's a place called the Whale Bay, and they came from Holland, and they were Dutch, and even came from France, and they had even a war up there with the maritime war, because that was the first oil boom in Europe. They used to oil from the whales for the lamps and food, maybe. So it was very important. But then suddenly something happened. Of course, they killed too many whales, but also they disappeared around 1800, because then the ice went south, 500 kilometers in about 10 years, the ice age, so they couldn't hunt anymore then. And the Whale Bay was covered with ice all year. And then suddenly in 1990 it was discovered that the whales are back, and the scientists were very surprised. So now suddenly the whales are back, and they found many of them. Of course now we don't have whale hunting, but the scientists go up and investigate. And the point is that the ice age in 1770 or 50 maybe was further north than it is today. And Al Gore and of course IPCC says that the ice in the Arctic will disappear in 5 years, 10 years. Of course, it has been less than today for 200, 300 years ago. When this was discovered, when they looked in logbooks in ships, see how far north go the ship, what do they see this day? Because they write in the logbook, we have ice, we have much ice, now we cannot go further north, and we can find a limit. And scientists have looked in the books, go to the libraries, and of course these are preserved, so that's a good source. So we cannot deny that the ice has been so long. But when there was a map published in 1999 showing this, but 4 years later a new map came out, and then was the 1769 line had disappeared. So from then on it looked like it has been going north all the time from 1816, 1960, 1999, and people are not told anymore that it was less ice in 1769. So that's how things work. Now we shall forget about this period, but it is there, it's part of our history. But I must tell you one thing that we discovered by looking at the changes over the 400 years. It looks exactly how the sun has behaved during these 400 years. So then we could connect the movement of the ice age back and forth to the sun output of radiation to the earth, the light that comes to the earth, the total light and activity. So we connect the ice age to the variations of the sun, and then the variation of the sun to the planets. So we have a good chain of events. We don't know the mechanisms, but we see the similarities in the data sets. Something very different, the ice age and the behavior of the sun, and how the planets makes the sun move. Of course, that's our science. But what you ask about now is about the IPCC and what we call the activists, that they want to have a message that we, the people, are guilty of polluting by burning fossil fuels. So we produce CO2, carbon dioxide, certainly we do, but that is a very small part. If you look very carefully what carbon dioxide we have in the air today, it's only 4% of it. 4% comes from burned fossil fuels. 96% comes from other sources, which is from the tree, from the ocean, most from the ocean, but also from soil, wet soil in Africa, in the rainforests and whatever. And when we have warmed up the planet after the little ice age in the 1700s, then of course warming up slowly, and then more CO2 is coming out of the ground, of the sea, and so on. So we're talking about 4% of a very small amount. Now, I'm from Norway, and we have an organization in Norway which is called the Climate Realist, Klimarealist in Norwegian, and we have about 600 members. Ordinary people are members, and they contribute. So we try to at least inform our members and try to educate them so they can go out and talk to ordinary people and tell what really happens. We try to be very exact on what we read and how we interpret it. To educate people, but the bad thing is, of course, that it comes into the schools, and in the school you learn simply that CO2 warms the earth. Point. That's all. And it's very difficult to break that.
I think they're depending on there's a couple of generations that will be completely bought into it, and they're hoping everyone else is going to die off so they can get that way. But it doesn't seem to be working, which is great. So.
Yeah, the one thing we certainly hope or think that may happen is that the sun now will go into hibernation. It will be less active, less radiation, and then slowly we'll see cooling coming, at least to Europe, Northern Europe and Western Europe, and then people will understand that the global warming is not there. It's not a reality anymore. But media hyper this up all the time. One warm day like today, of course, this is man-made. We have polluted.
We're already being told it's the hottest summer on record,
Exactly.
which we've actually covered as being an absolute lie.
Yeah, exactly.
Last week.
Exactly.
Well, thanks very much for your time, and we look forward to the rest of the conference.
Yep. Thank you.
I asked Christopher Monckton what he thought of people like George Monbiot and especially The Guardian.
Well, you see, they are the drones of the Communist Party. The Guardian has always been a communist newspaper. It calls itself socialist, but that is the code word for communism, because they know these days if you call them communists, then everybody thinks less well of them. They're socialists, they think sounds nice, but they are communists, really. And with them, there is no reasoning. They are not capable of rational thought. Once they have been told the party line, their job as drones of the party is simply to repeat that party line. They have no other function in life, no other mission in life, no other understanding of the idea that they have minds that they could use to think out for themselves whether this was actually right or wrong. And the likes of Monbiot are contemptible. They have no real understanding of science. He is a 14th-rate zoologist. He is what I call an oxymoron. In other words, he was an undergraduate at Oxford who didn't know anything. And he is in a position of what passes for authority at The Guardian. But then The Guardian has no authority. It, I think, no longer prints a print edition, or if it still does, it's not going to be very much longer. It is dying on its feet. It's leeching money out like nobody's business. They're making huge cuts to their staff because they can't any longer, even with the vast left-wing funding they get from the Scott Trust and other highly questionable sources, they can't actually keep going. So there's no point in trying to engage with people like that because they have no interest in the truth. And what I find much more interesting are the people who have maybe heard and until now believed the party line, but are not necessarily active political supporters of it. And those are the ones with whom one can have an intelligent conversation and simply say to them, may one suggest to their minds that there may be another side to the story, and then they very often will listen. But the likes of the people who write for The Guardian, they won't. You know, this is the party line, they are the party faithful. They cannot now resile from their position, which is going to leave them looking extremely silly. Because if what I said in my presentation here today proves to be correct, and that of course will be for the scientific community and not for me as a mere fumbling layman to decide, but if it is correct, then that is the end of the climate scare, beyond all hope of recovery. And at that point, The Guardian is going to be one of those that slinks away and never admits again that it ever wrote anything about how settled the science was. And so that's the way we'll deal with The Guardian. We'll just undercut them from the scientific direction, because the scientific community cannot indefinitely ignore actual, formal scientific errors in the climate models that have got them into such trouble. And those formal errors, some of which I identify today, and there are many more, but those are the ones that I thought were good to reveal, because on their own they establish that climate sensitivity is low, we won't get much warming, we get some, but not much. Once everybody in the scientific community understands that I am not talking about matters of opinion, these are formal scientific errors. We know who made them, we know when they made them, we know why they were adopted, we know who pushed them, we know the whole history of how these errors came to be and came to be incorporated in the models. We are now able to say this, and we will in due course publish it in a peer-reviewed journal, and once it is published, and it will be published, unless there's something wrong with it, which at the moment nobody here has said there is, and I draw much confidence from that, because these were some very expert professors and doctors and fathers of science that I was addressing today. If it turns out that we are all correct, and that therefore the global warming storyline is over, it's failed, then the scientific community will sort itself out over time. And all these big institutions that have said there is no doubt about this and the science is settled will have their funding cut by angry governments. And the scientists who were most behind this will probably find it convenient to retire early.
Christopher Monckton also had something to say about Brian Cox.
Cox is not a good scientist. He's a third-rate physicist who happens to wear tight jeans, and so all the ladies go swooning over him. But he is a completely incompetent scientist. I've heard him give a lecture at CERN where all the really eminent scientists who were there thought and said as much, that they were dealing with a complete fool. And he is a fashionable pseudo-scientist of the sort that the BBC likes to engage with. Because the BBC could not stand now to admit that it was wrong on this scientific issue. So they want constant reassurance from anyone they can get who is a celeb. And he, like it or not, is a celeb. He's a celeb because he's an incompetent scientist and therefore finds it better to ponce around on television than to do science. And so he knew perfectly well that if he wanted to continue to broadcast on the BBC, he had to go along with the party line, which he is entirely scientifically incapable of understanding anyway, or criticising. So I find him a rather sad and contemptible figure, who will, of course, like all of them, eventually back away and pray that everybody forgot he ever uttered a word on the subject.
Let's hope so. Thanks a lot, Lord Moulton. That was great, and keep up the good work, and we'll be with you.
It's a pleasure. God bless.
Over the forthcoming weeks, I will be putting more of the lectures and information up from the Dawn of Truth conference. It's very important that these scientists are heard. Their voice has been really marginalised, and what was apparent at the London conference was that they are a very open bunch of people. They are not closed-minded at all. In fact, they're very different from the opposing side, who are extremely militant about climate change. The programme is very deep, and the pockets of the globalists who are pushing this are also very deep. Now, these scientists are doing this really on a shoestring. Their information, I believe, is absolutely essential for the public to hear. So please spread these videos and do take an interest in the science. I just wanted to give some information about how the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was actually set up and by whom. It was really catapulted into existence by Bolin Palmer Brundtland, who launched the idea of creating an intergovernmental panel on climate change with the intention of proving the existence of anthropogenic global warming due to the increase in atmospheric CO2 content. When reason slept, monsters took wing, and now we have the fear of a catastrophic rise in temperature, the fear of a catastrophic sea level rise, the fear of a catastrophic ocean acidification, etc. All issues worshipped at the Paris COP21 meeting in 2015, although all being based on modelling in strong opposition to observational facts and physical laws. There's just a few quotes that I'd like to read out, and these are actually from the conference volume for this year. I saw that most men only care for science so far as they get a living by it, and that they worship even error when it affords them a subsistence. Johann Wolfgang van Goethe. Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we fear less. Marie Sklodowska-Curie. Problem is not human intervention in the climate, it's improper political invention in climate science. It has corrupted scientific findings from the very beginning. That's Paul Driessen and Ron Arnold, 2016. I suspect that a suitably learned community in geoethics will enhance the needed global effort to sustain human existence and our environment on Earth. John Gleisman, 2016. So that's it from Windows on the World. Keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World, and we'll see you next week. Please spread the word about the new Dawn of Truth conference, and we'll be putting much more information up about it in the future.